Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Taylor.
And I'm your co-host, John Micton. Join us every 2 weeks for conversations with international school leaders, educators, and innovators who are working and engaging in the world of international school education.
And finally, just to say a huge thanks to our valued partner, Faria Education Group. We'll jump back in later in the podcast to give you some more information about Faria Education Group.
Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Micton, and co-host Dan Taylor is traveling and will be back with us next episode. I just want to send a special thank you to all those LinkedIn messages and likes and share outs. We're getting a lot of people sharing out the podcast, and we greatly appreciate the support and especially the comments and feedback. That's so helpful. So keep talking to us through Twitter and LinkedIn, or you can contact us directly. But we really appreciate all the feedback we're getting, suggestions, and also guest ideas. So thank you. This week, we have Stéphane Vermeulin, who I am very excited and privileged to have here. I'm here in the afternoon in Luxembourg, but the young man is up very early over here in Vancouver. So thank you, Stéphane, with your coffee, ready to kick in the day. And we're going to spend some time with Stéphane, who's going to share a bit about his journey as an educator over many different spaces, which I think is so interesting. But currently, Stéphane is the executive manager at the International Canadian Academy in Vancouver. But I want to stop talking and really turn it over to Stéphane and say a warm welcome to International School Podcasts. And thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Jen, for having me.
And now we'd like to say a few words from our valued partner and sponsor, Faria Education Group. Faria Education Group has been with you through thick and thin, helping international schools minimize headaches and easing transitions. Whether through paperless submissions with Open Apply, curriculum first learning with ManageBack, or school-to-home management with Schools Buddy, Faria has been your partner.
What's more, Faria has been expanding with additional services, including professional development for international school educators. Mini PD is a professional learning platform by practitioners for practitioners, with a global community of learners and coaches. Mini PD makes the learning experience more personal, flexible, and equitable. Looking for a PD solution for your school or something for yourself? Sign up for individualized coaching and enjoy a 10% discount using the code ISPodcast. Head over to app.minipd.com. That's app.minipd.com to book your personal learning coach today. Mini PD, embracing the learner in every educator. So, Stéphane, maybe what you can do is give us a little kind of, bio, just to frame a bit who you are as an educator. You're involved in a company that's a startup. You've worked at universities. Just kind of give us a little bit of your background, and then we can dig in and hear a bit about your journey. And then I have some questions I think our listeners would really appreciate hearing your wisdom and guidance.
Okay. So I started my relation to education started in the last century. It can tell you how old I am. I started
I've never had somebody say it last century. I like it. Being a little older than you, I'm just thinking, wow, that's quite a long time ago, but it isn't. But I love that term. Thank you.
So I started as a substitute teacher in Lyon, in France, in what people would describe as a disadvantaged area of the city, and so it was a tough first experience with teaching, really tough. But at the same time, I had some great colleagues, and that's a place where I learned a lot. So then I did a PhD, and so after my doctorate, I lectured for 3 years. So I moved to South Africa because that was the topic of my PhD, to see how the South African cities had changed after the apartheid. And so I went back to France to lecture at the university for 3 years, but it was very difficult to find a permanent tenure position. So we decided to move to international education, and we had absolutely zero experience with IB or international schools. So what we did with my wife, who is also a teacher, my wife said, "Okay, you can send your CV and apply anywhere, but China and India, because she's a little bit concerned when a place is too crowded, and she prefers small towns and things like that." And guess what? 2 weeks after, we were hired in China. So, and
And you're
that's
still
how.
married, so that's a good sign.
Exactly, still married. Uh, that's called resilience, I guess.
Yes.
But no, so yeah, that's how it started. We studied in Guangzhou in a school called Utaloy International School, an IB school. And then after 3 years, we wanted to move back to Europe, and went to ISL, the International School of Luxembourg, where I was a social studies teacher, and then I became a digital learning coach. And after 7 years in Luxembourg, we, for different reasons, we wanted a new challenge, a different life as well. And so we decided to quit our jobs, which were indefinite contracts. And so a lot of people were looking at us like, "Are you sure you want to do this?"
Stefan, I'm going to interrupt you. For some people, indefinite contract in some countries means once you get the contract, it's for life. And it's quite difficult to, get rid of people with an indefinite contract. There's some very strong labor laws that are very employee centric. Just wanted to kind of frame
Yes,
that.
no, no, you're right, and that's something that exists in some places in Europe, but not really in other countries like in North America, for example. So yeah, so and we decided to quit about around November 2019. So a couple of months later, of course, we had no job secured in Canada yet, and COVID happened, which made things way more difficult than expected. But in the end, things work out well, and so I could develop this startup with Andre Nudelman, who is the owner of the company. And my wife has a job now in school here, which was also a very difficult process to get a job as a teacher if you're a foreigner here in Canada. It's extremely, extremely difficult.
But that's great. And so you both now are in Vancouver. One thing, Stefan, is so you've had this journey as an educator, and you suddenly, you have two boys, you suddenly quit jobs and you decided to immigrate or go to a country that you had never lived, and really decided almost, not that you basically said, we're shutting everything down here and we're moving on. What was it? What was it about where you were in your journey as a learner and as an educator that suddenly you were willing to take such a big risk? Because if you're alone, it's very different than when you have a partner and children that also have their own lives, are in the school system. So what was it that kind of suddenly clinched you and you said, okay, now it's time to do this and jump?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's true. It's way easier if it's just you by yourself. You're a young teacher, let's say, you want to go to Thailand to discover the world. It's way easier. For us, our boys at that time were in grade 7 and 10. So at an age where it's usually difficult to move, actually, because you have friends, you have your own life. But I think we were all kind of ready to leave, and it was a collective decision. It was a family decision. So we all agreed on the idea to have a different to have a new life. But so what we did actually is that we look at Google Earth, and we said, okay, where on Earth could we have an interesting life? So we had different criteria. Everybody had different criteria in the family. So some of them wanted the mountains, the ocean, a place where we speak English, or maybe a little bit of French, etc. But the most important one was a progressive, open-minded society. And so in the end, we look at the map, and the most obvious place to go was Vancouver in British Columbia.
And that's where you ended up.
that's where we ended up. But so we decided to book a family trip, so a holiday trip in Christmas 2019 to visit the place, before before going for good, just to make sure we would actually love it, and we did. And I had a job interview at the same time for a company called Digital Media Academy, which went well. But they when I when I when I met the lady in charge of it, she told me that they were actually the position was actually already given to someone else. But she said, you know what, the owner of Digital Media Academy has actually a new idea, a new project that he would like to you maybe to to conduct for him. And so that's how it started. I didn't get the job, uh, but I was contact. I mean, he came back. They came back to me, and then the idea of International Canadian Academy and then TeacherWit started to take off.
So, Stefan, if you were looking back, so you had the experience, and there very likely were all kinds of ups and downs and challenges. It sounds very smooth, but I imagine, if you look at, you were doing this in the middle of a pandemic,
Yeah.
there were a lot of complications, and you had basically sold everything and said, okay, we're going, and the pandemic hit. If you were going to guide or give some guidance to people that are thinking, you know what, I'm ready to try a new space outside of education and I want to do the jump. Are there some things that you in retrospect think you should have done, or that you would say, if you're going to do this, these are some things to be mindful of?
Yes, it's actually not as smooth, you're right, as I described it, because it took us a long time to actually be able to move to Vancouver and have the paperwork done and everything like that. For example, we sold our house in Luxembourg, we sold everything, so we had everything in a container, and we thought we would be able to leave in July. But because of the pandemic and because the paperwork was not done, we actually had to wait until the November 2020 to be able to fly to Vancouver. So in the meantime, when you have kids, what do you do? So we had to we found we have a family place where we could go, but then I started to work a little bit with Jeff UTech and shifting schools in Seattle, so it was remotely. And so it was easier for us to move to a place where the time difference was less important. So we decided to move to Guadeloupe, which is a French island in the Caribbean, because that was the only place we could go during the pandemic, because that was the only place you could travel to as a French citizen. So we spent 2 months in Guadeloupe. The boys were doing online schooling, and so that was a whole experience as well. So what I mean is that you need to try to anticipate what is not visible, and and try to be ready for anything, because if you're the kind of person who wants to control everything, it's extremely difficult to make a move like this, especially with children. So you need to be flexible enough to integrate the idea that yes, things can go wrong, or it can take a different path, or it can be way more difficult than expected, and it's okay. We're together on this road, and we are going to find a way to make it happen. So it was a real test, a real challenge for us, really. Sometimes it was very difficult, but I think if I had to do it again, first of all, that was in 2020, so the worst year to make that move, for sure, because of COVID. That was completely insane, but we didn't know that, of course. And I think I would go more on internet forums, ask people who have done this before, because the one of the things that was extremely difficult and we didn't anticipate enough was the amount of paperwork that Canada requires for immigrants. That was way more complex. The whole immigration process in Canada was way more complex, because as international teachers, usually when you go to a place, the school does pretty much everything for you. So they
That's
support
so
you.
true. Yeah. Yeah.
They do the visa, they find, sometimes they find an apartment for you already and things like that. When you move by yourself, it's very different. Unless you stay in Europe, for example, then it's not as difficult. But if you travel across the Atlantic, or you change continents, you go to a very different environment, then you need to be ready and look at all the different steps you have to go through.
I think it's really important what you're highlighting, Stefan, is so often, if we think of international school teachers and administrators and leaders, people in the international school education space, that's true. When I remember when we went to Africa, we worked in China and Japan, there's a whole back end infrastructure. Okay, you have to get all your paperwork, but you're not the one knocking on the door, downloading the documents, or trying to navigate understanding the nuances of everything. And I think that's what's so interesting is you brought up this idea of being comfortable with not having control. So this idea of resilience and flexibility really seems to percolate out as something that you realized you had to engage with, even though you might have had images or timelines or hopes. It sounds like that resilience and flexibility is something that came out of that experience.
Yes, totally. And it's still something that is we are still working on those things, because we are still not permanent resident in Canada, so we still have some paperwork to do, I can tell you.
And that's interesting. We so often as schools talk about how we teach resilience and flexibility. But I'm wondering, from your experience, both of your children are, have been in international schools. How did you think they were prepared for those challenges and the uncertainty and the complexity? You had to go to Guadeloupe. There was, what did you observe about your own two children, this idea of resilience that we so often have on our mission statements, or, 21st century learners, or whatever words we use? I'm just curious, when reality hit, what were you observing from your own two children?
Yes, and about that, I think when you go to international schools, usually you're in a privileged environment. So it's a bit difficult in a way to teach resilience sometimes, because of the nature of the family life, the environment, the context where they live. And so for our boys, it was a bit like that in a way. But so I don't think they were extremely well prepared for that. But it's the fact that we were doing that move as a family was a big difference, because we could talk about it, we could support one another, and so we knew that was a decision we all made together. So that's the difference. So I think there's the individual resilience, and there's something like a strength you can take from the group, whether it's a family or friends, and I think we use that strength as well that we had as a family to move forward. But they were doing. I mean, they surprised me a lot during that phase, because they adapted so well to their new school, to their new environment, to a point where after only 1 or 2 months, they had lots of friends. They were doing sports at school. They were part of different teams, and they felt like they had been living in Vancouver forever. So they actually did extremely well. But
That's
I think
great.
the
And
language helped. Yeah.
I think, Stefan, also the fact that you brought up, which I think is interesting, is there's individual resilience and then there's group resilience. And really, you can be a very resilient person, but if your group isn't, it's then, it's very hard. And I think that's what, the COVID pandemic demonstrated a lot of group resilience amongst educators around the world, but also the idea that it's a collective choice, that you all had a voice. And we often talk about autonomy and voice for students, how important that is. And I think that's just a great anecdote, how you as a collective had your individual resilience, but you had to create your group resilience. And then also that idea that everybody had a voice and some choice kind of really made that whole experience very likely as positive as it turned out to be.
Exactly. Even if it's a different, very different context. For example, we decided to have them in a public local school here with a lot of diversity, and it was a choice, intentional choice. And we visited the school with them, and they, because I think they needed to change also in that regard. Uh, I'm not saying they were unhappy in their previous schools, but they were definitely looking for something more, I would say, normal in a way, like the real life experience of a real school experience. Sometimes in international schools, you tend to live in a bubble, or in the golden bubble, which is, I mean, it's which can be great, and I know many schools are doing their best to create the best conditions for their students, which is fantastic. But at the same time, it's a good experience as well to have friends who actually are struggling with real life issues, and be with them. For example, some of my son's friends are sometimes homeless, or sometimes their parents are can be, I don't know, drug addicts, or can have lots of mental issues and things like that, serious stuff. And I'm not saying that you want your kids, but they also learn from that. They also learn that yes, that does exist, not just in a movie, in the cinema, Hollywood movie, but in real life, you also have friends who have some serious stuff to deal with, and you can help them as well to go through these things. So I think they learned a lot since they're here as well about that. And I'm not saying all the kids are like this in the school, because
Yeah, yeah,
it's,
of course not.
you
But
know,
I think your point's an important one. And I think one of the challenges as many schools engage with diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice is that when you have an international school where there's a certain socioeconomic wealth, it's sometimes hard to create adversity. And I think that sometimes can be challenging to kind of how do you
we
navigate
can,
that?
yeah, exactly. Sometimes it feels a little bit artificial or not authentic when you try to create a learning experience that will have some diversity or some resilience aspect, because of what you were saying, the nature of the school itself.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great segue because one of the things that's so interesting is you're with an organization that's based out of Canada, the Canadian Academy, and you're also involved in this new professional learning network called TeacherWit. And so, what I would love to kind of hear from you, so talk a bit about the model that you're working with, because it's unusual. You are in education, you are working with schools, but it's a whole online ecosystem. Maybe talk to us a bit about what is the why of your organization.
Okay, so we are doing two things. The International Canadian Academy, so it's a startup that we developed in 2020, and the idea is we have created a model of school that is inquiry-based, competency-driven, and this model can be franchised in different countries, because we realized that there was a gap between the elite top schools that are usually very expensive in some countries, and the public system that is sometimes very underperforming in many countries. When I'm thinking about Brazil, I'm thinking about lots of other places like that. So there is a gap, and we want to fill this gap. And so the other thing we're doing is TeacherWit. So it's an online community for teachers, and it's entirely free. So the idea is to create a network of teachers, a place where they can exchange ideas, create, collaborate, find resources. We try to have regular live events, and inspire one another. So it's not us, feeding them, if you want, with resources. It's really the idea to create an organic community where teachers feel good, can feel safe to share their concerns, their questions, their ideas, anything. And we want to also use this with the teachers who will be part of the ICA school network as well. But it's open to everyone.
So the ICA, the International Canadian Academy, is basically you have, I'm going to say, a curriculum package, an education experience. So the curriculum, the structures, and the pedagogy, which is inquiry based. And then who is purchasing this? Is it a school district or could it be an individual? Who are your customers? Where are you finding your niche?
Yeah, that's a good point. First of all, the curriculum, we develop the curriculum with our partners. We have a partnership with the Richmond School District here in Canada. So they help us to develop all the teaching and learning materials, curriculum, professional development. And it's to find the partners. We have different ways to do this, and that's something I had to learn because I'm an educator and I didn't know anything about digital marketing, business networking, etc., and all those things. So I had to learn how to do this. But it can be purchased, if you want, adopted by a school district. Yes, absolutely, it's possible. But most of the time, it's not the case. Most of the time we have a local company, or it can be an individual as well, who wants to invest in education and make an impact in their country. So they approach us to become usually master franchisee, which means that they can develop schools in the entire territory, in the entire country. And then they find the partners, or they convert schools. Existing schools can become ICA schools. Or sometimes we deal with individuals who want to open one school, two schools, three schools, depending on their need, depending on the projects they have. And so then we work with them to make it happen. We provide them with everything they need to start the school or to convert the school. And we provide professional learning online and in person if possible.
And so so let's imagine we're a small company. We've moved into a city, and we think there's an advantage in having our own schools funded by. So we can franchise. So we can come to you. We get the franchise. Are these schools physical, or can they also be online? Is that something? Do you provide both services?
Now we don't do online school at the moment, but it's something we could do actually, and maybe we will be doing in the future. What we notice is that people tend to ask for brick and mortar schools right now, especially if it's a little bit like when you have a rubber band. We had so much online learning during the pandemic that it seems like everybody's going to the other direction. And I think it will adjust eventually in 1 or 2 years and go back to something more balanced. But right now, that's not what they're not asking for. I mean, our partners at least are not asking for online schools. Or however, they're still asking for some professional learning courses online for their teachers, which is something we do, and we try to be very flexible with that and offer them self-paced, cohort-based courses, workshops, and lots of different things so that they can decide when they want to have their professional learning.
So when you have a product, and so schools, organizations, schools, or individuals, what do you notice that you're bringing to the table that maybe a local public school isn't, or let's say an independent private school in the context of Canada, or an international school, because I know you're a global company. What do you feel is your pedagogic approach that's so different than some of the other schools that you are maybe placing yourself in that area?
Yeah, I think first of all, competency-driven and inquiry-based schools are not the norm yet. I mean, in many parts of the world. Sometimes we tend to think that it is, but the reality is that it's not. So it's still something quite new and that people are looking for. The other thing is that we include a bilingual approach, which is something that in many countries parents are looking for. And usually this is available only in the top elite schools, which of course is not something affordable for most people, especially in countries like in Latin America or Southeast Asia. So we use that as well. The other thing is that we are part of a bigger group of companies in education, and our sister company is called Digital Media Academy. It was founded in 1999 on the campus of Stanford University. And so they're doing very well, and they're offering lots of tech courses, camps for students and teachers online, and also they're doing some camps in places like Stanford, UCLA, Harvard, UBC here in Vancouver. So we have that in our package as well. So we have the technology, we have the bilingual approach, and we have the inquiry based. So if you combine all of that, it makes it quite appealing for many people comparing to the public system. And of course, we don't really compete with the big international schools, which probably offer sometimes similar services or learning framework, if you want.
And where are you noticing you're getting the most uptake? Where are people getting excited about your organization? Are you in certain geographic regions? You feel that it resonates more with certain profile of town or person?
Yes. Oh, well, we're still a new company, so we're still a startup. And so we have secured some contracts, which I'm very happy about, because it's difficult when you start up to grow. You need to develop. You don't have a lot of money at the beginning. You need to generate some income, but at the same time, you cannot afford lots of digital marketing and tools and staff, because you need to to generate income first before you. So that's always very challenging to develop a startup. But we are at this point where we now have some income, so we can now develop and grow to different countries. So far, the biggest market for us is Brazil. But Southeast Asia is another one: Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia. Because we noticed that it's especially in big cities. So Sao Paulo, Rio, those kind of cities, because the demand is extremely big. So as I said, most of the time, the countries where we have a strong demand are countries where the public system is failing. That's why, for example, we don't plan to open schools really in Vancouver. We have a partner, as I said, the district here, but we won't necessarily develop lots of schools in Canada because the public system is pretty good.
So it's really in places where maybe the public education system's under strain, maybe because of socioeconomic or political situations. You provide an opportunity basically with something that's packaged ready to go at a very low cost. In other words, the cost is just having your curriculum and the training and the professional development, but the physical buildings and everything are taken on by the entities in the local market.
Yes. Yeah. It's not locals in the sense that we do quality education. So of course, there is a cost attached to that. We don't do it, for nothing. But you're right. We limit the cost here. As a startup, for example, we don't have huge offices in town. We don't have lots of staff. We have to be clever and be multitasking all the time. So that's how we can make this work. But you're right. The local partners, they have to find the location, the buildings, and all those things. So we don't provide anything like that.
Yeah. Stéphane, you were saying just before that as an educator, you did not know about sales, professional learning networks, and kind of, making those connections, digital marketing. and the various different workflows that, we all know about, but maybe as educators, we don't experience them at the level that you did. What do you think was the biggest challenge for you to pivot to this new type of work, having been an educator before? What were maybe some dispositions or even some skills that you were suddenly saying, ooh, I've got a gap here, I need to go and kind of beef up my skill set? I'm just curious, because it's quite a significant shift that you went into.
Yes, it is. And the thing is that when I started, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I had to learn step by step a couple of things. Well, I knew I could do a lot of things, technology speaking. So that was a big help. For example, I had to create all the logos, the displays, the website. I did all the websites, all the backbone of the company, but I didn't know much about, for example, trademarks, uh, uh, how to develop a business plan, how to have a proper budget with key performance indicators, for example, KPIs. All these things, that are more business oriented. I knew the education part. I mean, not everything, but that was my background. But the business side was something I had to learn a lot about, and it took me a bit of time, but and I'm still learning every day new things.
Where are you going to learn? Where are you going? Are you tapping into other people in your professional learning network? Are you taking online courses? I'm just thinking, a lot of teachers like to start startups. And so what has kind of been your learning pathway as you suddenly realize, shoot, I don't know anything about digital marketing. Oh, trademark, what is that? Yeah. What were some of the things that you scaffolded in your learning pathway?
I did different strategies. So I used, of course, some people in my network to just more about specific questions. If I had something very specific, then I would reach out to someone. If it was just about how to question, like how to apply for trademarks, for example, international trademarks, then I would just do like everybody. I would Google it. I would go on YouTube. I would try to learn how to do these things, and I made some mistakes too, and then I fixed them, and then I tried again, and because I didn't know, for example, that for trademarks that you had to apply to your own country first, and then use the Madrid Protocol to make sure that your trademarks are actually recognized everywhere in the world, or you can actually pick the countries. I mean, all those things. So I learned by myself for most of it, but I think having people in your network, there's always a person in your network that knows the answer. So I think it's great to don't. I mean, my tip is, my suggestion for everybody who wants to start is, don't hesitate to ask around you, because even in your friends who are not educators, you probably have someone who is an accountant, or someone who is I don't know what, a webmaster, and they would give you some tips. For example, accounting, it's very tricky because first of all, I'm not an accountant. I have zero experience with it. And also, when you come to a different country, you have all sort of different rules, timelines, and we have to deal with different currencies as well, because we pay some of the providers in US dollars, some others in Canadian dollars, etc. So it makes everything more complicated. So I think that's back to the first question you asked at the very beginning. When you make a move in general out of your comfort zone, you have to be ready to know that you won't know everything, and that you will have to figure out how to make it work and learn.
That's, I mean, it's beautiful what you're saying, because that's what we're all hoping the kids that we're teaching, those are the values and the dispositions and the knowledge and the skill that we want them to teach. And I think what's so rich hearing is about how much you had to be resilient and also flexible and leveraging that professional learning network. You keep coming back to that. And those seem like some of the tools that you really have to engage with, is this idea of being comfortable not knowing things and going onto YouTube or whatever it might be. Do you think through this experience, you feel that you have kind of a different approach towards education because you have had to experience that? And as you are working with your curriculum designers and talking about pedagogy and inquiry, how much has this experience maybe shifted your own perspective about what, education really should be about?
Yes, that's totally true. The fact that when you're a teacher, I mean, you're every day in your classroom, you're very busy. You have to focus on your students, and it's very hard sometimes to step back and look at the big picture. And for me, it's the opposite. I don't spend time anymore in a classroom or in a school environment, which can be a problem because then I can be disconnected with the reality of the classroom. So that's why we have our partnership with the Richmond School District, so that we can still go to schools and have people who actually are in schools. But my vision has to be completely different now. I have to look at the big picture first and see, because when I design the learning framework, when I design the curriculum with the partners we have to make sure it can be implemented anywhere in the world, which is very difficult because you have different regulations, different restrictions, depending on countries. So sometimes you need, I don't know, maybe 20% of the local mother tongue. Sometimes you need some content, sometimes you need this, sometimes you need that. So that's the challenge we have. So we need to think about what's essential, what we should be doing everywhere in the world. And then we need to find a way to make some local adaptations if necessary, so to be flexible enough to make sure it can work everywhere. But it make me realize that yes, the most important things are what I already kind of knew, but it's even more obvious now. It's really to student agency, having a voice, making having some choice, thinking skills, social emotional skills. I mean, all the competencies that are lifelong competencies. That's really what we are trying to develop, because our curriculum cannot be content focused because we operate in different countries. So we cannot just say, hey, we're going to learn about the 19th century history of Peru. It's impossible because that wouldn't work in Kenya.
Yeah.
So we have to focus on the concepts, on the skills, on the competencies, on the dispositions. So and we in the end we all realize that yes, in the end that's what matters.
And that's
Because
so
we
true.
need to prepare them for anything.
And that's so true, is that you have to prepare them for anything, and the only way to do that, as you obviously have experienced yourself and are promoting, is this idea that really for a child to walk out of school, they need to have those competencies, those skills, those dispositions, those values. Because at the end of the day, the content, you can Google it, it's out there. And it's so interesting to hear you go through that as an educator. And I know, Stéphane, you have been a big proponent of visible thinking and thinking routines and worked very closely with Project Zero as a professional. But what's so rich to hear is that through your own personal experience with your family moving from Luxembourg and then over to Canada, and then you working with this startup and developing that, it seems all those skills and all those dispositions and competencies are exactly what fuel you every day. That's what very likely keeps you employed.
Yes, yeah, I guess, yeah. But and of course, it comes also with some challenges and some stress, But that's, I think, if we can develop these lifelong competencies, it can help kids navigate and cope with stress and cope with uncertainty and try to always look forward for solutions and or reach out to people who can support them. So it's not about being necessarily knowledgeable about everything or overconfident. I think it's really about trying to know yourself and trying to know what you can do, what you cannot do yet, who you can work with, collaborate to uplift you, and to so that's more the minds. I think the mindset is very important, and I agree with you that the thinking skills are essential, and anything that is Googleable is to me is pretty useless. I think I see the content as, I always say that, but I see the content as a brick, as a raw material that you use to build something. But what's important is your skills, your creativity about what you want to build and who you are going to work with to build something. And the content is just a brick. That's
Yeah.
it. You can find it anywhere. Of course, the brick can be yellow, can be red, can be different color, but it's still just a brick.
Stéphane, if you wanted to tell people that are thinking, that are in a startup, or students listen to this, teachers that are thinking about a new adventure, and through COVID, a lot of people have had time to reflect. I think the challenges of uncertainty and unpredictability, we're hearing a lot of people saying, is this really for me? Is this journey that I'm on, this learning pathway that I'm on, is this really what I want to do? And maybe I want to reinvent myself. Is there just a few thoughts that you think is important for people to walk away with, to keep in their head as they reflect about maybe jumping or maybe doing something drastically different?
Yeah, maybe I would say, first of all, you never know if it's for you or not until you do it. I didn't know, and I think it's probably I mean, maybe some people have already a good idea of what they want to do, and it's fine, and they should just go for it. But even if you're not sure, I think it's totally fine not to be totally sure you'll be successful, because if you start something and if you don't want to start something because you're unsure, then you will never start anything. What I mean is that if you feel like it's time for you to change, if you feel like it's time for you to explore something new, do it. And worst case scenario, it doesn't work, and you can find another teaching job.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
don't think
I
it's still doable.
I
Or you
like
can
you're
start.
basically
Yeah, sorry.
you're basically saying embrace uncertainty.
Yes, even though it's stressful, yeah, I know it is, but you can also start, like for example, on the side of your job. So you can start small, start building your business plan, your ideas, your audience. Start working on during the weekends if you have some time, or during the holidays. Start crafting your project so that it will reduce some of this uncertainty, and you will have a clear idea of what you want to do. And then when your project is more finalized and more polished, then maybe you can do like what I did, quit your job
Yeah.
and do it.
Yeah. I love that advice. And Stéphane, thank you so much. It's just so great to hear the journey that you went through and kind of the risks and the uncertainty, but also, almost replicating that in the case of your startup with a lot of uncertainty, but also a clear vision of where you want to go. Any parting words as we wrap up here? Anything you feel that you want to share further?
No, I would just say that, of course, can I do my self-promotion and say,
Of course, self-promote.
okay,
Yes.
so come to TeacherWit, people, because we want to hear from you. We want to have your input, your ideas, and we want to have you in the community.
Thank you. And we've got all the links on the show notes. We thank you, Stéphane, for your time, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, John. Bye.